The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day so far. I'm just on here to do a quick sound and visual check. So if you are able to hear me and see the screen properly, please click the raise hand icon so that I know that everybody can see. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will start in just a few moments. Okay, greetings everyone. My name is Sarah Clark and I am the program coordinator with CIPH. Welcome to today's Adapting Your Planning Toolkit for Turbulent Times, a complimentary webinar. I'm pleased to note that we have 19 sites registered across Canada for today's session. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent out once the recording is available. You will have the opportunity to submit questions after the session has ended, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of today. Please submit your questions into the questions or chat box. Today's webinar presenter is Fred Pitsadny. Fred is founder and president of Focus Management. Focus Management works with companies to develop a hard-to-copy competitive advantage through strategy execution. Fred and his Focus Management team work with business leaders to achieve breakthrough results by driving great execution of what matters most through their organizations. In short, making sure the really important things get done and get done well. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Fred.
Thank you for your introduction, Sarah, and for your continued support and all the hard work that you did to make this webinar happen. Really appreciate it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Adapting Your Planning Toolkit for Turbulent Times. I'm Fred Pitsadny, the founder and president of Focus Management, and I'll be presenting today's session. Joining me is Richard Jarofsky, a Focus partner who will be the man behind the curtain, pushing all the buttons and making sure that images happen when they should. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping items. Please feel free to take notes during the webinar, but as Sarah just mentioned, we're going to have a recording available of today's webinar, and it will be made available to you in a couple of days. Secondly, we'll be using the Q&A feature today to capture any questions you would like to have answered. So please enter your questions in the Q&A box in the bottom of your screen. We've set aside some time following the presentation, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. As little as 6 months ago, the tone and the subject for this webinar would have been very different. The image you see here would have represented our goals and hopes for the future. The focus would have been on planning how to successfully scale that next peak off in the distance. But then, with little warning, everything changed. In the space of a few short months, and it feels like a lot less, the COVID outbreak has turned our world literally upside down, with profound impacts, socially, economically, politically, and technologically. Those who are still in business are forced to conduct it in ways that would have never been considered just a short time ago. Our choices, our options have become severely limited. As a result, our conversations have turned from how will we achieve our long-term goals and those ambitions to how are we going to survive this and what will we look like when we do. If we didn't see the avalanche coming and hadn't figured out how to avoid it, and not many did, we now need to work on how to dig ourselves out of this mess. We all need to act very quickly and decisively and respond to changes that come at us just about every day as we move towards a new normal, whatever that becomes. To survive and thrive in today's unsettling and turbulent environment, we all need to rethink how we approach planning, managing, and executing our critical priorities. We all need to take the tools that we're all familiar with and reshape them to fit the world that we now find ourselves in. You all chose to be here to gain something from this webinar. Based on the many, many people we have spoken to in recent months and the clients we've worked with, it seems likely that one or more of the following things applies to you. Over the past few months, the world has changed for everyone. There are no exceptions, unless you've been living in a cave or some remote jungle somewhere. And coping with that change has become a priority across the board. Our lives, all of our lives, have been affected in some way. Suddenly, the things we accepted as normal and took for granted have been turned upside down. This is causing a huge amount of stress for us, our families, our communities, and our businesses. If you're anything like me, you're at the point now where you're saying to yourself, how am I going to get through this? What will it take to get safely to the other side? I mean, how different will things be when we manage to get there? Our ultimate purpose here today is to help everyone point their way to a brighter future. Any future-focused planning always begins with an assessment of the situation today. So let's take a quick stock of our reality as we now know it. The world shut down. Planes stopped flying. Borders were closed. People returning home were either placed in quarantine or voluntarily into self-isolation. You couldn't go where you wanted to. If you did, you couldn't get back. Buyers couldn't buy. Sellers couldn't sell. Shippers couldn't ship. Makers couldn't make. Every economy everywhere took a severe blow to the head. All thanks to something that we can't see and against which as humans we have no natural defense. And on top of all of this, we don't know what's coming next. Is there a second wave? Is this still the first one? Will there be a vaccine? What about an antiviral? When will it be safe to go back to something we used to call normal? This pandemic is crushing many paradigms. How we make purchases and what we buy. How we do business and who we do it with. How we operate internally. How we communicate with each other. I mean, the list goes on. In the face of this, we need to recognize an important reality. Whoever acts fastest and most decisively will set the pace. And to do this, we need to rethink our approach to planning. In fact, we need to a great degree, we need to rethink how we think, and especially how we think about planning. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to focus on 4 principles that you can employ to catch the wave and not be crushed beneath it. 4 principles will be supported by 6 specific techniques and tools. Those are going to be your takeaways. Let's overview the principles first. First of all, engage your people in the process of planning and deploying your plan, and do it early. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about employee engagement over the last decade, mostly empty words, as most organizations aren't really better than they were a turn of the century ago at doing this. I mean, not when it comes to real, meaningful engagement. I mean, there's some people going through the motions, but when you look at real meaningful engagement, not people are doing it well. Okay, quickly means quickly, not weeks or months. We're talking about days. Power through the execution by doing a few critical processes right over and over and over again. Planning sessions should be short bursts, 1 to 2 hours long, not 1 to 2 days as we're accustomed to when we do long-term planning, even operational planning. You've all heard the saying that no plan survives the engagement with the enemy, or variations on that theme. Well, it's more than a truism. A plan that fails to address the rapidly changing realities on the ground is worse than useless. In fact, it's downright dangerous. Agility and responsiveness will rule. Okay, the fourth and final principle: nothing stops a plan achieving success more than the people charged with its execution having only a vague idea of the authority that they have to make decisions and get important stuff. We're going to cover how to fix that today. It's a very key point. Those are the 4 principles. Let's dig into each of them and put some meat on the bones. There are 2 important reasons to ask your people about their views and their ideas. The first is they want to be asked. I mean, they want to feel that someone actually cares what they think. I mean, in their position, wouldn't you? The second reason is that they know things that you don't, not because they're necessarily smarter, but because they're often closer to the action, closer to the customers, with suppliers and competitors. The last thing you want to hear during a debrief, especially for a failed initiative, is, I could have told you that. You never want to hear those words. You want to hear them early, not later. It only makes sense that if you ask questions, you need to listen to the answers, right? I mean, nothing turns people off more than taking the trouble to respond to a question or an inquiry, only to be totally ignored. Now, most of us have had that experience. It doesn't feel good. This must not happen. It's critical to respond in some fashion throughout the entire process. Ask people early in the process to make their input useful. This is during the assessment stage and prior to putting pen to paper and creating the plan to take the business forward. This should be one of the very first things that you do. There are a variety of tools, many available at low cost, that can be used to gather this input. I mean, SurveyMonkey is one, and there are others. Keep it simple. Don't make it too elaborate or complicated. Ask a few questions. Make it clear why the answers might matter. We'll look at a couple of examples in just a minute. Whatever information you gather, it needs to feed into your battle planning. Now, why do we call it battle planning? Well, because for us, it conveys a much different level of intensity than conventional strategic planning, which is, important stuff, takes a little longer. It's usually spread over several months. But this isn't about winning the war. It is about achieving the success we need today that creates a secure and positive tomorrow. The first thing we need to do is quickly come to grips with the situation in which we find ourselves, particularly in 5 areas of importance. First of all, what is life like today for our customers? I mean, how are they being affected? How are their attitudes, preferences, and behaviors changing? What new challenges are they having that might represent opportunities for us? I mean, maybe their need for what we do has decreased, or perhaps increased due to the present situation. For instance, the dramatic drop in commercial and civil aviation has had a terrible impact on companies that service and repair aircraft components such as wheels and brakes. Sailmakers, on the other hand, who had the capability, have gained from the surge in demand for covers to protect engines as aircraft sit idle. What about our suppliers? We depend on them in order to operate our business. So how are they doing? Do we need to be looking for alternatives? I mean, we can't afford to have a supply chain that is unreliable due to capacity constraints. As borders close, many experience logistical nightmares and have been able to establish a secure supply of materials and components. As for our competitors, are they showing any signs that we could exploit? Have their service levels dropped? Are they losing customers? Is there a fire sale opportunity out there? Maybe we can snap up some smaller companies that are struggling so that we can expand our reach. If we don't, someone else might. One of our clients, a maker of plumbing products, experienced a huge increase in demand for their products because many of their competitors were either unable to operate or had their supply chains disrupted. Their big challenge, and put this under the heading of nice problem to have, was how are we going to make enough of our product quickly enough to take advantage of this windfall? How are our people doing? This has been a very stressful time for many, perhaps all. Are we doing what we can to help them through this? For example, can we shift hours to help those who are having difficulty managing childcare? Finally, we need to appraise our operational capability and capacity. Are we able to meet service level requirements and still remain cost efficient? If we have excess capacity, can it be redeployed to other areas? For example, look at the number of companies that are now making respirators and masks. Remember the survey I mentioned a few moments ago? Well, these are a few of the questions that we ask. First of all, what one thing? You want to look at one thing within our power. That's a very important framework. What one thing within our power could we do to help others deal and cope better? The first thing you want to ask your people is, how can we help you? How about our customers? What can we do to serve them better? After all, a business without customers, well, it isn't. What ideas do you have for how we can bond better with them? Become the trusted go-to company, maybe even indispensable. We might be suffering operationally, and our less than great performance is damaging our reputation and causing frustration. How can we address those concerns and get better? Okay, now those answers that you receive, and there's going to be lots of them. Our experience says you will get hundreds of ideas come through the pipeline that you need to be able to sort, sift, and collate, organize, analyze those. You want to look for the nuggets, especially those that might look at first glance to be kind of a little off page. But include those nuggets in the conversation you have with your core planning team. Okay, next, set a very small number of objectives whose achievement will make a significant difference to the business. This is a huge problem that we've uncovered for years, that organizations tend to want to set too many objectives. We're talking about 2 or 3 objectives. Make sure that they're clear, both what they are and why they matter. And make them as measurable as possible so you can track your progress toward them. I apologize for that phone. Something like this. An example of a tight objective. Increase full order on-time shipment rate to 96% by December the 31st without increasing per unit shipping costs. This objective not only drives increased internal efficiency, it also benefits the customer. It's a real win-win. Do it quickly. Lean towards action rather than deep contemplation like sometimes you do with strat planning. Make your sessions short. 1 to 2 hours, and place them in a tight timeline. Whatever you can accommodate. Think about doing 2 or even 3 sessions in a week during the assessment and planning stages. Okay, keep it simple. Should be your mantra throughout the whole process. A beautiful plan on paper breaks down if people aren't clear on what they need to do and how the various elements need to fit together in order to be successful. In a moment, we're going to look at a very powerful yet simple way of ensuring the clarity of your plan. The most common cause of execution failure is that people don't know what is expected of them, what they're supposed to do, or the authority that's available to them. It's a major problem. We'll cover more about that, about the authority clarification in a few minutes. Before we do that, let's look at a few tools that can be extremely helpful in ensuring that your planning process moves forward both productively and that important things happen. Let's start with a good old 3W chart. I mean, most people have seen this and used it. I mean, a lot of people are familiar with it, but this is a very useful tool, simple, useful for recording what has to be done, right? The W. Who is accountable for the action, the second W, and when the action is to be completed. The 3 W's cover the basics. For those of you who want to capture, record, and manage more information, add more columns, right? You could add, for instance, one that talks about resources, such as this one that identifies the resources, people, dollars, technology that are needed to successfully complete each action. I mean, once you create this, the information can be loaded into a project management application or just a simple Excel spreadsheet and used to manage the ongoing execution and tweaking of the plan that you produced. The second tool is helpful in managing the dynamics of your planning session, what actually goes on during the session itself, and helping to keep the team moving forward efficiently. This one we call rules of engagement. Now, you might call them ground rules or meeting guidelines. You probably have them, probably used them in the past. But whatever fits your situation, your culture. Like any rules, they can only work when people know them, when they're kept visible. We actually post them on a flip chart on the wall, and when they're used. We revisit them at the beginning of every working session and periodically have teams rate themselves against those rules. Traditionally, those rules would be developed by the team using consensus. That's our approach. These days, we find that leaders need to be somewhat more directive in their approach by laying out the rules, but then seeking the agreement of the team before proceeding. Here are the rules of engagement that, in our experience, are well suited to today's situation. First of all, you don't want to chew up time with long-winded conversation, and that includes team leaders that don't add a lot of value, right? Encourage everyone, including yourself, to be brief and to the point. Avoid trying to arrive at that perfect solution, grinding away with discussions that go on because we want to get that perfect solution. Get it close enough and then do it. Beware of sidebars and off-topic wandering. What we do is use a parking lot to record anything that might want to discuss later. We actually put another flip chart on the wall, call it the parking lot, and as you hear things that might be important but kind of off topic, record it on the parking lot and make sure you deal with each one before the meeting ends. If you're doing your meetings online, it can be really difficult to manage the flow of the conversation, that's for sure. Make sure there's only one person speaking at any time and that others can listen and digest what's being said. The 80% rule is similar in purpose to rule number 2. Someone can call the 80% rule when the real value of the conversation has been achieved, so that you avoid using up precious time with little to show for it. The 80% rule recognizes the fact that all conversations get to the point of diminishing returns. You've been involved in those conversations where it's going on and on and on, and you're trying to squeeze that orange, get another drop of juice up, but it just ain't worth it. So the 80% rule is really kind of about efficiency. Let's make our conversations efficient. Okay. Most of us are familiar with KISS, and I'm not talking about the rock band. This is about keeping it short, keeping it simple, and keep it however else you want to end that expression. The point being to avoid getting lost in the little stuff instead of staying focused on what really matters and then driving to action. The emphasis today needs to be on action and not spending great amounts of time contemplating your options or analyzing things out to the fourth decimal point. The engineers, the accountants, they've got their calculators out, they've got their computers out. There's just too much influx. And we need to be decisive enough that we have complete information, but close enough is often the best choice. For the people who are risk averse, this can be a very, very uncomfortable experience. Now, a simple tool that you can help make choices more quickly, we call it spitball decision making. Most of you have heard the term spitball, right? Which just kind of means close enough. Whatever your objective, there'll always be a ton of things, lots of variety of what you could do. There'll be lists of them. I'm sure you've been through this. The challenge is, how do you quickly sort, sift, and select the best option from amongst those possibilities? These days, the time we take to make decisions need to be collapsed. Again, lean towards action rather than deep contemplation. Close enough is often the best choice, especially when it quickly leads to action. So we call this spitballing. Let me show you this grid and how it's going to work. The grid uses the traditional cost, effort, benefit analysis, right? There are lots of ways you can use this basic idea, but let's remember that the underlying point is keep it simple, don't overthink it, make decisions, act quickly, and again, close enough is often good enough. Let me just talk about some of the quadrants and walk you through a little bit. So if we start in the top left, that's what we call the best deal zone, right? So you can see that the value benefit is very, very high, and the cost, low to medium. So that's probably the place where you want to end up most times. The top right-hand quadrant is called the justifiable zone. So the costs are high, but the benefits are also high. And this is where you got to pull out the calculators and do the analysis to figure out, although the cost is high, could we justify taking the action that's being suggested? The lower right is a tough call zone, where in fact, the costs are high and the benefits may be only low to medium. But it seems like a great idea to do, but it's tough sometimes to say no to these ideas. Just recently, we were doing some work on the shop floor, and it's a hot place, and the idea came up is, why don't we air condition the shop? Well, you know what? If we had extra $100,000, we could probably do that. And so it's a tough call zone. We just had to figure out other ways of cooling down the shop by using fans. And we actually even said, look, why don't you guys start wearing T-shirts instead of the long sleeve shirts? So that's one of those tough call zones that sometimes you can look at other alternatives. The lower left, I mean, that's the why bother zone. It's often the quickest one to assess, like the very low benefit, very, very low cost. So it's like, why bother? What's the benefit going to be, right? However you use this, the point here is to help you make choices quickly based on some fundamental criteria. How much will it help? How much will it cost to implement? How much risk or uncertainty is involved? I mean, how complicated or simple is it? I mean, you get the idea, right? This is all about moving quickly through the process of choosing in order to get to the doing. Until we do something, it's all academic. It's just nice ideas. One of our clients recently worked through a list of 130 brainstorming ideas in less than 2 hours. I mean, that would normally take all day to sift and sort those. We did it in 2 hours. I mean, the keepers were summarized into a much shorter list for a second round of what we call spitballing. So try it out. It really does work. Okay, so once we begin the doing, how do we ensure that we stay agile and stay responsive? That we continue to adapt and deal with the changing circumstances in an effective way? Well, the fundamental to do here is to keep an ear to the ground, to keep ourselves aware of how well the execution of the plan is going, and more importantly, to know whether the plan is getting us the results we need. I mean, that's the whole point. If we're not getting results, then it only makes sense to change the plan. It can be easy to forget that in the heat of the battle, that the plan is not the objective. If the plan isn't getting us there, then we need to change it and do it quickly without a lot of fuss. This is no different than calling an audible at the line of scrimmage in a football game. But if you know the play you just laid out in the huddle isn't going to work, toss it. Call an audible. Now just make sure that everyone hears the new plan. I said earlier that I'd come back to the subject of authority and the need to allocate it in the right measure. to those who will actually execute the plan. Authority needs to be clearly defined. It also needs to be requisite. I mean, not too much or too little. Both have got serious consequences. We often use a simple equation to get the idea across, right? Responsibility less authority equals big time frustration. I mean, if I'm to be held accountable for taking action and held accountable for the result to be achieved, and I don't have enough authority to make things happen, I can't help but be frustrated by the whole experience. Failure is a high probability for me and for the business. And the next time you ask for volunteers, I'll probably take a long step backwards, right? You don't want that to happen. You want to avoid that. Okay, so let's get into some detail on the subject of defining and granting authority. Two pieces, define it and grant it. Rather than think of authority as a gradient, with infinite number of degrees, we bucket into 4 overall levels. This keeps it simple while getting the point across. Level 1 is the highest. This is just do it, right? I don't need to consult. Here's how it's defined. I don't need to consult with the team leader before, nor do I need to advise my team leader after taking the action or making the decisions. Just do it, the Nike version, right? Just get it done. Everybody agrees. Your boss agrees. Just get it done. Level 2 is one notch below. In this case, I do not need to consult with my leader before taking the action or making the decision, but I must advise my leader afterwards, right? And it's an obligation, not a courtesy. Level 3 requires that I consult with my team leader before making the decision or taking the action, right? So before I do anything, you need to consult with the team leader. Level 4 is the lowest. At this level, I really don't have any authority to act or decide. It's up to me to bring ideas and recommendations to the team leader, who will then make the decision. These 4 levels of authority can be applied to any type of decisions or actions that will commonly need to be taken within the scope of almost any role. Let's look at an example to help really clarify how this works, right? Let's look at how the authority level approach can make things very clear for an individual who's charged with executing a set of changes at the shop floor level of a manufacturing operation. That's the example. That person's various authorities might look something like this. The first example falls within guidelines and policies and receives the highest level of authority. So the individual has a level 1. This person does not need to consult with or advise a team leader. They can just go ahead and do it. The second item, which requires a level 2, is something the team member can do, but is obligated to inform the team leader after taking the action, right? This makes sense, as changes to the mix of suppliers might be questioned by others in the organization, and the team leader needs to be able to respond without being embarrassed, right? Never good to surprise the boss. Number 3 requires that the team leader consult with the team leader before taking the action. In this case, it's possible that the team leader knows of initiatives taking place in other parts of the organization and might seek to get some input into how things take place or the timing of them. So finally, due to the very significant impact of the 4th item, it has a level 4. The team member can make suggestions only, and due to the potential consequences, the team leader will be the one to make the ultimate decision. Okay, so some authority statements might seem almost understood. The question is, understood by whom? To you, maybe. But what about the person who has to execute the plan? Does that person have the same understanding as you? And more than often, they don't. That's our experience working with hundreds and hundreds of management teams over the last 20 years. So they stop short of doing what needs to be done. Other times they go too far and get themselves and sometimes the business in trouble. I'm sure that you have either felt this yourself or seen others in that dilemma. That should be sorted out, made clear, and aligned with what has to be done right up front. Now, we've spent a lot of time on authority clarification. That's only because it's one of the biggest blockages to getting things done. And in our experience, very few companies have an effective process to spell it out. We're going to wrap this up shortly, but before we head into the home stretch, here's a quote from someone who had tremendous experience in battle planning and getting results. Take a few seconds to read this quote. So Dwight Eisenhower was the supreme commander of the Allied forces in the European theater of operations in World War II and the 34th president of the United States. Pretty strong credentials. So in the context of today's situation, how do we put these words into good use? Well, spend your time and energy assessing, planning, and especially executing and adapting. Don't get caught up in the beauty of the plan that you lose sight of its sole purpose, to get results. Before we finish, let's review the takeaways from today's webinar, beginning with the 4 principles. First of all, get your people involved early, and that's important for 2 reasons. The first is that they're probably closer to the action and can reveal some useful information on how to move forward. And the second reason, again, you never ever want to hear somebody saying to you later on, "Why didn't you ask me? I could have told you that." Don't want to hear that. In the interest of moving quickly, assessment and planning is best done in short sessions held close together. These days, holding meetings virtually using platforms like Zoom has become common or GoToMeeting. Pick a mature platform that works for you. Just get to it. Agility and responsiveness are critical during times like these. Agility relies on short feedback cycles, right? You can build this into your deployment process by incorporating short check-ins. Could be 10 to 15 minutes twice a week. I mean, we've had clients who say, look, let's take 5 minutes every day and just do a quick assessment. A slightly more extensive checkpoint might be 30 to 45 minutes once per week. But you see, they're short. They're not 2 or 3 hours long. They're minutes long. And don't forget about authority. If you don't remember anything else from this webinar, make sure that you have your authority pinned down very clearly. I mean, we looked at some examples of how authority can be established for individuals at the task or decision level. Take the guesswork out, ensure people know how far they can go and under what circumstances to get important things done. So those are the 4 principles. Now let's review the tools and the techniques we covered. First of all, use surveys to get input from your people and to engage them in the process, and do it early. Rules of engagement properly employed will help manage the dynamics of the planning team. This is kind of what goes on during the meeting. So you want to be efficient, be effective, and productive using rules of engagement or ground rules or whatever you call them, right? The 3W chart is a simple, very simple, yet effective way to record important information, to track progress, and to hold each other accountable for getting things done. It really helps with the clarification of things when you map it out. Spitballing can help you quickly narrow down your choices and move quickly from brainstorming to action planning. You want to shorten those cycles down. Make sure everyone is clear on the levels of authority. Here we go again, levels of authority. They have to make decisions and take action, and make sure those levels fit both the decisions and the individuals making them. Sometimes you got to tailor them to suit the individual. People have different styles and approaches, so make sure the levels not only fit the types of decisions, but for the people who are making them. Then finally, keep things flexible and adaptive. Make changes to the plan based on hard evidence, right? You want to track the evidence and make sure that everyone knows that the plan is changing. Okay, if you were kind of feeling like this guy when we started, I hope you've picked up a few ideas that will help, both literally and figuratively. Our ultimate purpose here today has been to help everyone point their way to a brighter future. Think seriously about applying the principles I've shared and the tools and the techniques that support them in your business. Okay, and if you want our help, we're just a phone call away or an email. Just be glad to talk with you. Okay, so we've got some time. It's 10:37, so we've got some time for some questions and answers. So let's get to those questions. What are they?
Thank you so much, Fred. And like Fred said, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question and answer box or the chat box on your webinar control panel. We do have one already in. Is there an efficient way to establish authority levels and who should be involved in the process?
Okay. Well, let me answer the latter part of that question. First of all, in terms of who should be involved, you want to have the team leader and those direct reports in the room. And it's important you do that because you want to make sure that all of the functions understand each other's roles. So if we started with, say, the president and those direct reports, you're going to have around the table somebody from operations, HR, finance, sales, from marketing, from IT. And so it is really critical to make sure that they understand each other's roles, because you don't want the IT guy stepping on the HR person's toes. You don't want sales making some decisions that perhaps marketing should be making. I mean, a classic discussion that we hear around the table is sales goes out and makes some changes, say in the price, for example. And then we get a discussion at the senior table and the marketing person says, hey, wait a second. I'm marketing. Remember what that means? It means price, promotion, product positioning, price. I'm responsible for price, not you, sales. So then there's a big, long debate around who's actually got what kind of accountability and authority around making sales, making price decisions. And we've seen those conversations go on for several minutes, sometimes several hours, to make sure that people, even at the senior level, get those authorities clear. Because if they're not clear at the senior level, they don't get any better as you cascade down through the organization. In fact, it just gets worse and worse and gets muddled. As far as the efficiency goes, my recommendation is that in advance of the meeting, so you're going to call a meeting, we're going to do authority clarification. People need to know the goals and objectives. They need to know the agenda. Send that out in advance, always in advance, and send out some pre-work that asks people, using those 4 levels and the definitions, to say, look, given your accountabilities, map out the key decisions and or actions that you need to take to get your job done. So do that in advance of the meeting. You know, it might take an hour or two for people to kind of map it all out. Then at the meeting, it's a much simpler to say, okay, everybody go to the wall, or post it, or pin it up, or present it on a slide, right? That says, here are the authorities that the HR person believes they have. Now let's have a debate around that. So you can accelerate that whole process by getting a good agenda, goals and objectives out in advance, and have people do the pre-work in advance. Question number 2.
Question number 2. We normally start our strategic planning in the fall. Given the current situation, not sure that this will happen as it usually does. Can the approach you are talking about replace strategic planning, or does it complement strategic planning?
Well, first of all, let me make it very, very clear that the approach that we outline, which is battle planning, should not replace your strat planning. You need to do both of them. You might need to change the horizons for your strategic plan. I mean, typically now it's 3 years, 2 to 3 years. You might have to just shorten that a little bit because things are changing so rapidly. But the process I define is not to replace strategic planning. However, you might be able to use some of the techniques that we talked about. I mean, spitballing, taking action, getting authorities clear are just as valid, and perhaps even more valid, when you're doing strategic planning. So for example, you know, you always end up with the big strategic initiatives, the big to-dos, right? What needs to be done? Well, beside that strategic initiative needs to have an initial. If there are initials, if there's 3 or 4 initials, you put a star beside the person who's accountable to get it done. They may work through a team, but when it comes to accountability, it's one person, not a team. That's often a big mistake that teams make, right? Oh, we're all responsible. Really? Who's actually accountable to make that team get the results and report back to the big team, right? So always use that who, what, when chart that says map it out, and that's very, very useful even at the strategic level. The ground rules, absolutely use them during strategy sessions, because those sessions especially can go long, go deep, and you need to make sure that you're operating that strategic session very productively, very efficiently. So those are a couple of ideas that you can actually use in strat planning, but please don't use this process to replace the strategy work. You've got to do both.
Thank you so much, Fred.
Any other questions?
That seems to be all the questions that we have for now.
Well, those are good ones, Sarah.
So if anybody else has any questions thinking of afterwards, please feel free to send us an email at info@ciph.com, and we will be sure to forward those off to Fred for answer. And once again, I just want to say thank you so much to Fred and his team for this webinar. And a recording and survey will be sent to you within the next day or so.
Well, listen, guys, thanks very much for your attention and your questions. On behalf of the Focus Management team, I want to thank each of you for taking the time out of your hectic day. Thanks to Ralph Supa, and Sarah for helping organize and promote this webinar. And always, we greatly appreciate your support. Thank you very much. And thanks to Richard, my webinar co-pilot, who's back there pushing all the right buttons. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.